welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Pratt, and thank you for having me today. So I'm Angela Spence. I lead diversity and inclusion for Retail Business Services, which is the North America servicing arm of Ahold Delhaize. So one of our local brands that you would recognize would be Stop and Shop, some others outside the footprint, Hannaford, Food Lion, Giant Company, etc. And I am with the partnership in terms of the Executive Council, where Pratt and I get to engage every other week.
Thank you. It's good to have you joining us here today.
Thank you.
Cherié Butt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Cherié Butt, and I am at Biogen at the Cambridge headquarters. My role is medical director for clinical assessments. Very excited to be here. Thanks. And my affiliation with the partnership is I was in the inaugural class of biodiversity.
Thank you. And Alister.
Hi, Pratt. Hi, all. My name is Alister. I'm an ER physician at Mass General Hospital and a faculty member at the Center for Social Justice at Harvard Medical School. But most importantly, I was a BioDiversity Fellow this year with the partnership. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And really, I want to thank the three of you all for joining us today. This year's been unlike any other. Certainly, the stresses that have been put on our infrastructure have been visible to those of us who pay attention to these types of things and to those of us who don't. And Alister, maybe we start with you. You're an emergency room doctor. Maybe you can share just a little bit about what you experienced, what this year was like inside the emergency room at MGH.
I'm a metaphor guy, and I think that the closest metaphor I can sort of think of with regard to this year is it was like tightrope walking in the middle of a hurricane, trying to balance on the one hand, taking care of some of the sickest patients I've ever taken care of in an emergency room setting, and on the other side, sort of trying to keep it together and trying to make sure that I was okay through it. There were times through the early phases in late March, April, where I was seeing things that I'd never thought I was going to see, and I hope to never see again. For example, when we think about putting patients on a ventilator, a bad day in the emergency department is maybe 2 or 3 patients put on a ventilator on one shift. And that's when you've had a really, really bad day. I remember there was one shift that I had where we put 12 patients on a ventilator in my 1-day shift. And if that sounds overwhelming, it is. It's this type of scenario where you're helping to start one patient on high flow oxygen, getting the medications ready to go, prepping them to be intubated. And just before you get the process going, another patient comes in and you have to start again, and you put them on high flow oxygen. You get the medications going. You begin to call their family member to tell them that it's time for them to be intubated. And just before you get started on that one, another patient comes in. And so it was that sort of feeling stretched and needing to be in 3 or 4 different places that was just utterly just vexing as an ER physician. And so, that thankfully we're through the hardest part that we were going to face in spring, and the summer let up a little bit. And now we'll see what the winter holds, but certainly just unprecedented times.
Yeah. Terrifying. For a lot of us, we hear these stories, but for all intents and purposes, it hits home, not when someone is intubated, but when there are shortages in the supermarket. For a lot of us, this started off with the run on toilet paper. And so, Angela, maybe you can talk a little bit about how did stores like Stop and Shop, right, the places where that are so familiar to us. A lot of us don't ever visit the emergency room, but we all go to Stop and Shop. And what was that moment like for your organization?
Right. So there's, I definitely cannot compare our situation to what Alister is going through, but our associates did have a lot of challenges, right? And there was a lot of support that was needed really from the corporate centers, from organizations like I'm with. And so when you look at Stop and Shop, right, there was this massive overnight influx of people coming into our stores and buying everything possible off of the shelves, right? And our associates, were working longer hours. Our associates were putting themselves out there in any way that they could to help our customers, to help ensure all of our community members have what they need. Our organizations and all of our great local brands stepped up when it came to food banks and food pantries and ensuring that those were full through our donation programs. We saw health and safety guidelines were constantly changing, right? And constantly new recommendations were coming out. And so the flexibility of our workers to ensure our customers were as safe and as healthy as they could be, and having that mentality of we're going to do everything we can, even in a constant changing environment, was something that we definitely saw dedication from our management teams and from our associates on the front lines.
Wow. Well, thank you. And we continue to thank all the folks who are on the front lines. So Cherié, I think for you at Biogen, it was probably a little bit different, right? Biogen is thinking about these types of issues and the intersection between life and science all the time. What was February like? What was March like for a company that is thinking each and every day, how can we best save lives in the long term?
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. For me personally, it was an extra level because I'm an immunologist. This is my field. This is what I study. And so I had a lot of friends, coworkers, family members who were calling and saying, please explain this to me. What's going on? What do I do? And there were a lot of, what's the best thing? And I was like, remember when your mother told you to wash your hands? Guess what? That works here. And so there was a lot of advice personally that I was having to give. And there was an extra level of it because it wasn't simply the pandemic. There were also the protests. And so within my organization and across many of the organizations that I'm affiliated with, I was that Black voice. I was asked, what can we do? What more can we do? And the inequities of the pandemic was something that I knew all too well. And yet it was enlightening for others. And so it was almost like, it's always been there. But I'm glad you're here now. So let's think of what we can do. And you're absolutely right. The focus really changed because for all of the biopharma companies, we're always talking about patients matter and patient focused, but the urgency, which has been there, it went up about tenfold because it was too real and we needed to do something now. Something that was best about my company was as an organization, if you're in drug development and devices and all of that, you can choose what you want to do. And strategically, we said, you know what, we're not into vaccine development, but we can partner with people. We have manufacturing excellence. We can do that really well. So we can partner with those who are developing potential therapies, and we can offer that expertise. And that to me was really important. Rather than trying to pivot and go into an area because it's what people are doing right now, we said, no, let's think about what is the expertise we can bring and use that. And so we provided financial resources to people. We provided human resources. Individuals who might have been exposed were offering up their antibodies to whatever it was. So similar to what Angela was saying and what Alister was saying, the sense of urgency was there and the how can we help? And I love that each of the three of us did it differently. and we're all adding value in a different way. And all of that is important. Nothing is better than the other, because if there's no toilet paper in the grocery store, the ventilators don't matter. And so all of us, and that is the biggest, most important idea here, is that all of us have to be contributing, and no one is better than the other.
Yeah. No, you hit upon two themes. One, that it takes all of us, and two, that the impact was disproportionate. And so that leaves some folks feeling a lot more stressed than others. And Alister, you talked about this a little bit, and Angela, looking at this from an organizational perspective, you talked about this a little bit. How did you guys manage this stress, or how do you continue to manage this stress, both personally and then at your organizational level? Angela, we can start with you.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the grocery industry, right, like we're well aware of inequities, whether it be through our, food programs or, even around wages to our workers and so forth. And so we did, in the pandemic, realize this very quickly, what was happening to our associates. And we very quickly, you saw all of the Ahold Delhaize brands increased pay, put in emergency pay multiple times. And we also saw a lot of we ensured that all of our benefits were also working and at the need of our associates, right? Ensuring that COVID test was covered for our associates, ensuring the things that they needed were there, ensuring that they had time off, right, to go and get a flu vaccine. And that they had access to a flu vaccine within our pharmacies, right? And I would imagine, I wouldn't commit to it now, but that we'll see the same thing as our same pharmacies go to administer the COVID-19 vaccine as well. We also saw a lot of, around flexibility, right? We look at women in grocery stores and just the expectations of still being the caretaker, right? And many of our associates don't have just the ability to stay home and homeschool their children. And so we had to quickly think about what flexibility options do we even have available to hourly workforces? How can we support our communities, right? And so we saw some of our brands partnering with local boys and girls clubs to get access to hourly workers for care for their children. The Giant Company, which is in Pennsylvania, did a grant, I think $200,000 in grants to local child care centers to sustain them. And so the organization really stepped up to ensure that our associates were being taken care of as we understood the stress and the strain. For myself personally, I think it does go back, right? I think my passion to Cher's point, I'm sorry, is it Cherié? You have to cut. Cherié, sorry. To Cherié's point around even the protest, right, is we really had to think about all of the things that were going on in the world right now as we looked at our response, right? We had to look at the inequities in access to healthy foods through our sustainability and our health programs. So myself personally was very committed to around childcare, was something I've been passionate about long before the pandemic, moving to Massachusetts to some of the highest childcare costs in the country. And this just exacerbated that for many families. And so really working through the, partnerships through things like the partnership or other organizations to set up conversations with other working parents to figure out what we can do from an advocacy level. Additionally, myself, I was sitting there, and even though I'm in the grocery store, I was like, what more can I do? And had founded with a couple local friends in my Newton community an organization called Feed the Fight. And so we raised tens of thousands of meals for frontline workers as well. And so I think everybody just got off the sidelines, right? Everybody stood up and said, what do I do personally? How do I get on board, and how do I help? And I think we saw that even more within the grocery industry as a whole, as we understood the importance of how dependent we were for our customers to get through this.
Yeah. One of the things I say about what's probably cruelest about COVID is we can't give each other hugs. And Alister's been a participant in our biodiversity program this year. Throughout the year, I don't think he missed a session. And every time I see his face, I just want to give him a hug. And like, Alister, how do you deal with, there's so many of us who want to just give you a hug right now. How are you coping?
Well, Pratt, I'll tell you what's keep me going is the annual Martha's Vineyard trip that we're going to get at some point. as part of the Biodiversity Fellow. So I've heard a lot about it, and I know that it's not canceled, it's just postponed.
That's right.
And I see Cherié shaking her head. I mean, I want to be in Cherie's position, being post the Martha's Vineyard trip. You know what I mean? How do we as healthcare providers heal through trauma? You know, what's interesting is that in the emergency department, we're trained to respond to the 10-car pileup, to the shooting downtown, to the explosion in the middle of downtown Boston. And I think these sort of traumatic one-time events are things that we are all sort of ready for. I think what we're not trained for, quite frankly, is this consistent, slow burning emergency, right? Like this, like you can't shut it off thing, right? Whereas when the I was in the emergency room when the Boston Marathon bombing happened. When that happened, it was like, this sort of outpouring of every single doctor in Brookline, I felt, showed up at the Beth Israel Deaconess, right? The eye surgeons came to help their eyes, the plastic surgeons came, the plastic surgeons came to help folks with heat facial. I mean, it was
Hold on,
just
Alister.
this.
We're losing your audio a little bit.
Yeah, it was this out. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. It was this outpouring of support of folks that came all together all at once. And I think that's how we all started with COVID, with folks coming out of the woodwork. But you can only do that but for so long. And I think there's something about this that really tests your ability to stay consistent, this sort of silent endurance. Quite frankly, that I think, as Black people, as people of color in this country, we are trained to have silent endurance, unfortunately, in this country. We are trained to persist and to figure out a way to overcome adversity and challenges. And I think that it's sort of sad to say, but I think we are ready for this this sort of constant assault, or maybe not, quite frankly, ready, but we are more ready than we could have been, just sort of existing in this country. And so, when we talk about the healthcare disparities, I think that's where myself and many other people of color who were on the front lines found the strength to not only do the job that we're supposed to do, but like Cherié said, do the job she's supposed to do, and also advocate at a higher level, right? Because that's her obligation. That's the obligation that I feel too. And, it's a privilege to be in these positions to be able to do that.
What about for you, Cherié? How are you coping, and how are you helping others cope?
Right. So Alistair makes an extremely important point. I recognize this, again, because I'm an immunologist. I already knew what to expect. This is not acute. This is chronic. And most of us can handle acute. We could hold our breath through the summer, but everyone said, okay, well, it's got to get back to normal by September. And I said, it's not going to. The truth is, I do believe we'll be wearing masks for a very long time, probably at least until 2022. And so, because I was thinking this is chronic and most people were thinking this is acute, I was saying we have to figure out what the new normal is. And that is what I've always been talking about and trying to focus on, is helping people understand this is not going away anytime soon. And we have to be ready for the future. We have to understand that normal is no longer what it used to be. It's going to be called new normal, and we have to be ready for whatever that is. So I've spent a lot of time talking people through this process, helping them understand, why do you need to wear a mask? Why do you need to wear a 3-ply mask versus a 1-ply mask? And so it's been nice to be able to apply my science in the real world, because that's a very rare opportunity. But the difficulty as a scientist is we have a tendency to speak scientifically. So I had to quickly pivot into making sure that the words I use could be understood by everyone. And even understanding, because I worked at the FDA before I came to Biogen, helping people understand the drug development process.
Mhm.
This is why you hear people say it is unlikely that you will have a vaccine by X date, because this is the process. And the reason why the process is there is because the number one job of the FDA is to keep Americans safe.
Right.
And if doing things really fast cannot guarantee their safety, then they will have to say, I'm sorry, we have to slow this down and make sure every step is done right. So that really was, I did this in two parts. Number one was education. I spent a lot of time explaining things to people and helping them understand you need to be planning for the future. It's not going away. This is not going to end in September. This virus isn't going to magically disappear and no more viruses will ever be here. Number two was exactly what Angela pointed out, and Alister. I understood my privilege. I understood that I was still employed. I people, even the cafeteria workers at Biogen, they weren't working because they weren't allowed in the buildings. So I knew that vulnerability. It was so acute for me, and I felt helpless, but more urgent about doing something. And to Angela's point, a few of us got together and would spend our own money to have meals for hospital workers. In particular, hospitals where a lot of Black and brown patients were being seen, and we knew the resources weren't necessarily going there first. So that was a very important part, is what can we do given the fact that we are in, to be quite honest, a place of privilege because we're all still working. And then also making sure everyone understands what the path forward is. That for me was really important. And you know, look, all of us grieve in a different way. And so for me, it wasn't enough to vent, to say, oh, this is bad, oh, it's bad. I need to be doing something. I need to feel like I'm useful and doing something toward impact. And that really was how I felt better about myself. That was how I handled my own stress.
Mhm. I love this framing of chronic versus acute. I think it's something that, quite honestly, I think echoes very much what we talk about a lot within the partnership. And so I guess it then translates to, now that we know that there's going to be a new normal, without scaring everybody, what does that look like? What are some of the innovations or the adaptations that we can expect moving forward, that we're going to continue to live with moving forward? And again, not to scare everybody, but let's do something positive and something negative. I'm looking at you, Cherié, if you want to start off with that one.
Yes,
This
actually,
is where the body language is tough. So
yes, no. This is because I'm ready for this. So one of the things when I was explaining to people about the path forward is I said, industries will change and we can be ready for that. Who would have thought 1 year ago that we would have drive-through testing? Who would have thought that would have existed?
Yeah.
You would have said that's a dead industry. And yet you see all of these new industries popping up as a result of the pandemic. Now, what I believe should happen is those individuals who lost their employment and who it'll never come back, they should be trained so that you can get them employed. And for drive-through testing, there's only but so much skill that you're going to need. And it's not about the person just doing the swabs, but it's also the logistics. So you can have people trained to do that part. And again, looking across and seeing what are going to be the new industries. We now know that technology, having the right platform to make sure we can give virtual hugs that feel like virtual hugs, that's going to be a new industry. So let's be ready for that. And the most difficult part is accepting, and this is where the negative part. We're never going to have the capacity, like a concert. It's not going to happen for a very long time. So we have to adjust to, how do we still have a restaurant, our favorite restaurant, survive when it needs volume in order to do well. So thinking about the creativity of the industries that are evolving and the ones that are still going to exist, but they have to modify in order to do well, that's what we have to be focusing on.
No more concerts. So that means my dad should hang up his musical career. So
Live concerts with large crowds. There will be concerts.
Yeah, outdoors.
Right. But when you think about the industries that have adapted, you know, we just all celebrated Thanksgiving, and it went pretty smoothly. All right. Like there were no shortages, there were no hiccups. It was different in the way that we at home were all celebrating individually. But when Angela, you think about the supply chain and the food chain, it was pretty smooth. And
Yeah.
what were some of the innovations you all have brought to that are evident now?
Yeah.
In the
I'd say
world?
the first one that comes to mind with Thanksgiving is smaller turkeys, right? So that was a quick pivot that we had to go deep into our supply chain and say, we're not going to have 30 people at a Thanksgiving with a 20-pound bird, right? So that's like the most recent, you know, but there, I think when you look at shopping habits, right? Consumer shopping habits have been changing for a long time. And we've all been slowly adopting, right? Online grocery shopping, grocery pickup, delivery, all of these things. But we quickly, as an organization, you know, had to figure out the technology and really embrace the consumer behaviors that was coming. And so we've seen record-breaking online ordering, e-commerce shopping at our grocery stores, right? When you think of Stop and Shop, you may not think about I'm going to place an online order because it's been relatively new to us. But we quickly got the staffing. You know, we've been hiring, still hiring all the time to get people in to fill some of these new roles and have shoppers in the stores purchasing or selecting your goods in a safe way. I'd say the other thing, you know, we look at some of the accommodations we made that could potentially stick, right? You look at early shopping hours for elderly, immunocompromised, you know, pregnant, so forth. We really listened to our community and said, what do we do to ensure that you have a safe shopping experience? Something like that could stay through the pandemic, and are we going to see stores get creative based on the needs in their local communities? The other thing I think that you potentially see is even the idea of flexibility, right? We've had to get COVID, in my mind, is not flexibility. When you look at the corporate world or you look within an hourly workforce, we were forced into this environment and forced to adapt very quickly. But it's challenged us. Grocery is a very traditional industry, whether it be from corporate employees going to an office every day, or the way that we do scheduling, that you get your schedule 2 weeks in advance or a week in advance, you know, depending on your store. But how do you deal if you've been potentially exposed, or if your kids get sick, or any of these types of things? And so our store managers have had to really embrace flexibility, thinking about their absentee policies, thinking about a lot of their ways of working and scheduling that just weren't there before. So that's one that I could see sticking, is that we've learned so much on how much associates appreciate that flexibility. And then I would say the other piece is around, I think this goes both to the point earlier, you know, with both going from the pandemic and then going to the racial injustice, is that we've had a lot of courageous conversations with our associates. And so we've never seen before the amount of listening, the amount of putting our employees at the center of everything that we do, the amount of connection that we've seen between the corporate environment to the stores, to the management level, to the hourly population, to the CEO, to the individual associate level, of having the two-way dialogue and connecting at levels of vulnerability that we've never seen. And so I've seen the Courageous Conversation Guidebook that we rolled out at the beginning of COVID used in so many different ways, right? We just had an outbreak at our store, or my associates unexpectedly, their mother had died, and how do we deal with this, right? Those skills that our managers maybe weren't using as often, they've now used those and will be able to connect and I think be better leaders to ensure that their associates really feel comfortable day in and day out coming to work.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we've talked about all the time in the executive council, and that in reality, the skills that you bring and the skills that your colleagues bring as the folks who are running the the D&I initiatives within your companies have really never been more needed than they are right now. And
Yeah.
so,
yeah, the pandemic resource guide, which was something the executive council, I myself wasn't a contributor, but it's something that I've broken out numerous times, to think about what questions could we be doing, or what ideas do some of the practitioners that are on the executive council came up with to help organizations through the pandemic. I've definitely gone to that guide that the council's put together to spark ideas and spark thought for us to have engaging conversations with our leadership teams.
Yeah.
Because to your point, it's a never ending, right, in the D&I space, but it's got a platform right now that we definitely need to take advantage to drive systemic change into all of our corporations.
That's right, because it's still about people.
Yeah.
No matter what's going on, it's still, the innovation still touch people.
Yeah.
So let's make this the easiest segment of the conversation. All right. What are you proud of your organization that you all have accomplished? And how can we continue to support you? How can we support you individually, and how can we support the work that you're doing?
Things that we saw, Pratt, across the country was this awakening among healthcare providers that if we didn't come up off the sidelines and engage in the political discussions that really were at the core of our COVID response as a nation, then we were going to continually sort of get the brunt of not only the shortcomings that we as individual providers were feeling, but that our patients were also experiencing. And, what we saw, across the country were providers who were angry, who were frustrated, who were upset. I can't remember how many times I had been asked by patients in mid to late March for a COVID test because they heard on TV that they could get a COVID test whenever they wanted. In fact, I remember one patient who came in asking for a test, and I said, "Look, I'm sorry, we don't have any tests here. In fact, I have 20 tests for the entire hospital, and there are pretty strict guidelines on who can get those tests and who can't." And the patient looked at me and said, "Doctor, that's ridiculous. How is that fair? I just saw the entire Brooklyn Nets get tested yesterday." And so what I think COVID taught us was, or for some of us, it showed us in stark terms, the healthcare disparities that exist in our country. And the question is not, are there healthcare disparities or not now? The question is, now that we have seen them, identified them, for many of us lived through them, what do we do next? And what we saw across the country was healthcare providers who were standing up and saying, well, one of the ways that we can help treat a sick nation is not through any procedure or prescription. It's through voting. It's through helping people step into their own power. Like Toni Morrison said, when you get these jobs that you're so brilliantly trained for, remember that your real job is to empower somebody else. And we saw healthcare providers across the country making it easy for their patients to vote. Our program was one effort in that, Vote ER. Healthcare providers across the country helped over 50,000 people either get their voter registration process started, get their mail-in ballots to vote in the election in 2020. And I think that was the beginning of sort of culture change across the country when it comes to healthcare and its relationship with civic engagement, that healthcare providers understand that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
As someone who used to register voters for a living, the fact that civic engagement was still high while folks are saving lives is something to just be so proud of. And for those who don't know, because Alister is a gentleman, Alister is the founder of Vote ER, and this is the brainchild of his to combine healthcare with civic engagement. It's a way of really making both healthier, both our body politic as well as our own bodies. And he's an exceptional young man and represents the very best of this partnership community. And so, Alister, thank you for your leadership here.
Thank you, Pratt.
Cherié, I mean, the same. Plug shamelessly all the great work being done at Biogen and in the life sciences.
Right. Thank you so much, Pratt. I want to echo the sentiments that Alister mentioned. We became very flexible about the vote, and Biogen was encouraging all of its employees, provided time off, flexible time in order to participate in the process, to be part of the voting efforts. That was one part. But what was more important for me, especially given the pandemic and the protests, was our launch, our full launch of health equity, this health equity initiative, which was multi-pronged. It wasn't just access and providing education. It was also, what's important for me, because I'm in clinical research, is we thought about what do our clinical trials need to do in order to make sure that everyone from any community can participate. And something that personally was inspiring, I was in awe, is this idea when I said, listen, I have some thoughts about what we can do. I'm not exactly sure if Biogen was interested, and they were totally interested. They said, we want to hear. And if that's what you want to do, then do it. Because one thing that I've noticed about our efforts in the clinical trial space is being a deep dive on the underrepresented experience. Because unfortunately, when you look at what communications are being sent out, a lot of the underrepresented efforts are really underserved. And underserved really is everybody, right? People who live in rural communities, people who may be socioeconomically depressed, many different things. But one thing I said is I want to reach the underrepresented who aren't underserved. What is their story? And many admitted, you know what, we really haven't been looking at that population. I said, I want to be asked to be in a clinical trial, but no one's ever asked me. And I said, and I know a lot of people like myself, no one's ever bothered, because you immediately go to certain neighborhoods and you say, this is where we're going, but you got all these other people that you're missing. And that really is our effort, is to be far more holistic and not simply beeline to where everybody always goes and say, oh, well, we tried and we're just going to, at least we tried, we get credit for it. So that's one part of it. And also related to COVID, providing resources across a number of different ways. Yes, we gave to the food bank. Yes, we gave for nursing home testing opportunities. Yes, we gave to researchers to really explore what can we be doing in this space to better understand the science. Not simply developing a new therapy, but better understanding the science behind the differences that we're seeing. That to me was beautiful because it was beyond the business, right? It wasn't about finding the next therapy and manufacturing the next therapy. It was doing the right thing. It was social responsibility. And that made me more endeared to my company because I just wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. So to that point, to your first point, how can we as people of color raise our hands to participate in clinical trials? And how can we make sure that those who are conducting trials are looking to communities that look like ours?
Yeah, so the first problem, and this is what came out of the research that I was asking for, is a vast majority, whether or not you're Black or brown, have never participated in a clinical trial. They have no idea. So when people talk about the trust in the community, I'm like, but nobody even knows what a clinical trial is to know whether or not they want to do it. So don't assume that the trust is not there, because in fact, I have many friends who are physicians who have asked people to be in trials, and the Black and brown patients are like, sure, because I trust you. And so leveraging the trust, but I think what's most important is let's explain the process to people. Let's help them understand this is what it takes and the advantages of being in a clinical trial, that you're part of the solution, that if somebody, if you have an approved therapy, You have the right to ask, okay, well, what was the effect on people who look like me, who have my journey? And if we never have anybody in the trial who look like you and who had a certain journey, then we will never be able to answer that question. So I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time explaining this is what a clinical trial is. This is why it's important to be there. This is what it entails. This is what we can do to make sure we meet your needs, and we will answer any questions along the way. That's going to be the first step.
But to the hundreds and the thousands of members of the partnership community, we all now have somebody that we know, that we trust, that's part of our family in Cherié, who is encouraging us to participate in these trials. And hopefully we can see more of us participating in the future. So thank you, Cherié. Angela, shameless plug. Something great that we want to share about you and your colleagues and associates.
Yeah, I would say looking back, right, I would say definitely the thing we're most proud of is what keeps the grocery store running. It's our associates, right? We've given the $10 million to COVID, we've given $5 million to fight racial injustice and internal commitments, but our grocery stores wouldn't keep going and being so resilient without those associates. And so I would say that's definitely what we're most proud of. I'd also say you look at our supply chain, right? It hasn't broken. It's been tested. It's been stretched beyond limits that we never thought were possible. And generally, when you go to the store, like you said, at Thanksgiving, you were able to get, if not everything that you needed, almost everything on your list. And so I think that shows the resiliency and the need to the grocery industry. And I don't think it's going to stop, right? Many of our stores have pharmacies in them. And so we are now seeing tests in areas of the grocery store that we haven't seen tested in this way, right? Many of our brands have signed up to help administer the COVID-19 vaccine. And so now we're seeing another total pivot on this journey, right, that we're going through, as here's another area where the grocery industry is really going to step up and support our communities and ensure that we're there to support as needed throughout next year, right? To Cherié's point, the end isn't in sight, and we're going from the first part of being out of toilet paper into summer, into it happening again, and then we're going to go into the vaccine administration into 2021. So again, none of this would be possible without the people who work for the grocery stores like Stop and Shop in our communities.
Well, we all recognize that nothing that we do or that we hope to do in the future would be possible without the work that each of you do. And so just thank you again. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you for what you will continue to do, and know that we don't just appreciate you, we love you. Thank you for being such valuable, wonderful members to our community.
Hi, Pratt. I am Reihaneh Irani-Famili. I am the Vice President of Business Readiness for National Grid. National Grid is a company that serves 20 million customers across upstate and downstate New York, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And I have been with the company for the last 4.5 years. I'm also a graduate and alumni of the class of 2020 of the Next Generation Executive Program with the Partnership Program, which has been a really rewarding experience working with so many great, talented leaders across the NG program.
Well, we're glad that you're here. You were a wonderful contributor to the NGE experience. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely.
So you're responsible for business readiness. So I'm sure that you knew that 2020 was going to be a year with global pandemic and everything was going to be shutting down, and racial unrest, and you guys probably just handled this smoothly because you saw it all coming. Right?
Yeah, the crystal ball. I didn't tell
Right.
you I had one. No, no. I actually think, thinking back, I was a bit oblivious to how big of an impact this was going to be, and I had people telling me that this is going to be difficult, and we're going to have to change our plans. And I used to think this couldn't get any worse than SARS. And with all the precautions that we're taking and the 2 weeks lockdown, we're going to come back and we're going to be rocking and rolling. And it didn't really pan out that way.
So what did it look like? So what were some of the, you were at least thinking about SARS and had some template, but what, when the world started to shut down and certainly in the US in March, what did that look like for you and your colleagues at National Grid?
So I think for National Grid and for my colleagues, having been in so many storms and knowing that the primary purpose of us is to deliver reliable energy to our customers, the team was very focused on just that. What is it that we need to do, and how do we need to get prepared to deliver reliable service for our customers? And I'm sure you have heard and seen anything from sequestering to changing our plans of how we're serving customers, to ensuring that we're not doing the shutoffs that you usually do during that period. I think the whole company came together, and it was just an amazing scene of collaboration, of vision, of care, and our purpose coming to the forefront those first few months and all through, but especially those first few months were very both rewarding and challenging at the same time.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about a company like National Grid is you are literally in everybody's home,
Yes.
right? And so I'm sure you saw, and as a company, you saw firsthand how this pandemic was impacting people. What type of support were you providing to some of the folks that were on the front lines at National Grid in order to help prepare themselves to go into people's homes, and what type of support were you providing the folks on the back end who were making sure that the whole system was working?
Yeah, so some of the early decisions, and these were very difficult decisions, were around sequestering. So, and that is where the control rooms, they're very highly qualified, very unique set of employees that manage our control rooms, whether it's in gas or in electric. And so the decision to have them stay just so that we have the right people, that was one of the most difficult decisions. And really the company stood behind them, supporting them, and also supporting them in a way to make a decision of when is the time to start desequestering, because that was also an important decision. You make those decisions thinking that this is going to be short term. And once you realize that this is going to be a long-term decision, you need to start thinking, so how do I make it sustainable in the long run, serving the customers, reliable energy, but also allowing those families to get some sense of normalcy back. And it takes a lot of data gathering, a lot of analysis, a lot of scenario planning from all across the company to make those decisions. So that was one of the things. The other thing is, both for our customers who didn't want us in their homes and for our employees risking their lives going into people's homes, our safety team coming up with protocols of PPE, getting PPEs, getting the PPEs out to people, our facility team relentlessly getting our facilities ready for people and putting in the new protocols in place. It was tremendous effort. It still is. And I think we all have gotten for granted at times the fact that you flip the switch and the light comes on, or you turn the stove and the gas comes on. And it takes something like this to really focus you on. It takes a lot of people to make that happen. And when you have a risk that says maybe these people might be sick and out of work, and then what? That's when you start realizing that you need to think about this differently and do things differently. The other thing, very early on, our customer team, they did a fantastic job realizing the job losses that were happening, and the fact that our customers will be or were in a rough shape. And so really coming together, thinking about that customer first approach of we have the privilege of serving our communities. And what is the support that we can provide to our customers? That was another thing, and I think you have heard about a lot of the decisions that were made in those early days, about not shutting the gas and allowing people time. And I'm really proud of the people, and I'm really proud of the company and the decisions that we made throughout the last now 8 months.
Yeah. But it's stressful, right? It's stressful, and we heard from some of the other panelists, excuse me, about both the personal stresses that they're under as well as the stresses within their organization. How have you been managing this stress? Because from an outsider's perspective, I turn on my lights and I never once worry about whether or not they're turning on. Never once worry that the gas on my stove is going to light. How do you manage that? How do you manage that stress?
So I think it's two things. One is preparedness. And so you have to have, no one knew that there is a pandemic coming, but you always know what it takes to serve your customer, and you always know what it takes to manage a storm. And so I think that preparedness, and the drills that we do and all that, part of it is, do you have that muscle memory? Then when the stressful times comes, you can focus. And then the second thing personally is, well, there's two things. It's what I can control what I can control. So if I focus on what I can control, and if I do my piece of this puzzle, and have trust in my team and have trust in my peers and collaborate and communicate, this will all come together. So there is no reason for me to worry about 20 people. If I focus on my job and do it well, we together we can really achieve this. And I think that has been really helpful. And the other thing, never in my life I have been so focused and dedicated to having a morning routine of getting up, getting a 10-minute, whether it's walk outside or walk on a treadmill, a 5-minute meditation. I am not good at meditation, but just trying things out so that I can get myself grounded and get myself focused, because it was not just the 20 million customers and the 14,000 workers, it's also my family, and the support system that is no longer there. And now my son and my husband, and how to manage all that. It really, and it's not just me and it's not just us. I think everyone's struggling with that. And what I found helped me through was grounding myself every morning in whatever way that I could.
Yeah. You mentioned a great point. We are so focused on the great work that our first responders and frontline heroes are engaged in. We don't always remember the fact that they have a whole family and team that are both supporting them, but they're also relying upon them.
Yes.
And so I'm going to come back to this a little bit later as well. But what are some of the things that we can do to support families like yours, where you have kids and you have loved ones who sometimes have to take a back seat to the the job that you have in terms of keeping people safe and warm and lit?
First, I really appreciate you asking that question. And I think for me, the biggest thing is knowing that he's getting the education he needs, because right now they are right in that development and ripe development stages of their lives. And I worry that the decisions that are sometimes made about kids and kids' education are not seeing the health impact, the mental health, the physical health impact. And I think the more that we can put that conversation top of mind, and we can raise that and the needs of all children at these critical developmental ages, I think that's the thing that worries me the most, day in and day out, not just for me and my family, but for this generation that are really being impacted so severely by COVID and the shutdowns.
Yeah. Going back to just some of the prepared questions, I am sure that GRID has changed and innovated and adapted in a number of ways. What are some of these innovations that you think are going to persist, both in the relative short term, while even if there's a vaccine that's developed tomorrow, they're still going to take months, if not years, before
Yeah.
it's fully implemented. But that also just looking at the business, said, God, we could have done this, but for the emergency, we never would have gotten an idea like this enterprise wide.
Yeah. So, so the first thing, I actually think the world has permanently changed. I really think all of our assumptions as companies, as human beings, fundamentally shifted. I think we have all worked really hard for so many years to create these line between work and life, lines between, and all of those lines all of a sudden disappeared and blurred. It's funny because I think about it. I think introverts excelled, extroverts struggled.
Yeah.
And so that created a whole new dynamic in the workplaces. How we work, how we live, how we shop, everything is different now. And I think through that, people found people that needed to find a voice and maybe didn't have a voice before. I feel like they have found their voice. And I think that has been the thoughtful people that get lost in the big. And I think that's one of those things that permanently, I think we saw talent we didn't see before. The way we collaborated fundamentally shifted, because it's not who you are in what office or what floor, it's what you know and how you connect. I think more in terms of the national grid and innovation, I think the pace of technology adoption significantly improved. So if before we actually, Teams was a great example of that, or even like WebEx, we rolled WebEx out and it took us like months to get to a place of people using it, and then it wouldn't use voice and video, and almost overnight everyone adopted that.
Yeah.
You see multiple ways of technology, and I think technology was there before. Technology didn't just become a thing. It's been there for probably 15, 20 years. We haven't been adopting it, and we haven't been seeing the impact of productivity that it could have. I think that's one of the things that's fundamentally is going to shift. You'll see the productivity as a result of it, and it will continue to evolve. And so I'm actually really hopeful, that I always talked about this lag between technology creation and then the production the productivity impact of it, I think that's going to massively shrink. And I think we got closer to our purpose. And our purpose became a lot more real.
What do you mean by
Go
that?
ahead.
You got closer to your purpose.
I think if before you went to work in the morning, now every morning you wake up to make sure people have gas and electricity. It just became a different level of appreciation for what it takes to run a community and let a community succeed in every way, shape, or form. So I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's almost like folks are more empowered, right? They have
Yeah.
a greater sense of ownership and the mission and the work of the company.
Exactly. Yeah, I think definitely the pride. I always said from the day I joined National Grid, I said the one thing that has really hit me has been the pride of our people in the work that they do. And I think right now it's that pride on steroids.
All right, then channel that pride for a moment and just shamelessly plug the company. Shamelessly plug what you guys are working on, what you're proud of what you guys have accomplished, and not just what you have done, but really what you as a company have done.
I think a company of nearing 16,000 employees, men and women, woke up every morning despite what was on the news, despite the worry of their families and their loved ones. They got their National Grid gear on and they got to the streets, and the one thing that they thought about and worked for was ensuring that every customer would get reliable gas and electricity. And I am so proud of that selflessness, that focus that they brought to the table every day, and the support that they gave each other throughout it, whether it was because of a childcare issue or whatever it was. I think our CEO said it really nicely during one of the first days. He said, cut each other slack. And I think we worked through it. We seamless delivery to our customers, and every step of the way we cut each other's slack. We respected each other, and we really we became a better company through it.
Yeah. So then one last question.
Mm-hmm.
How can we continue to support you?
I think, Pratt, one of the things that I really worry about is, especially as new executives, as I guess younger is not the right word, but maybe as the new generation executives coming up the ranks.
I will exclude myself from this, but the folks who don't have as much gray hair as I have. Right.
I do a good job of hiding it, but yes. The human connections, the relationships, the dialogues, the conversations, that's a big part of growth and development. And one of the things I worry about is, because managing life, the crisis, the family is chaotic, because gatherings are impossible, and a lot harder for many years, I think. I worry that we will lose an opportunity to continue to build connections, to find strength in each other, and to be able to hold each other up and hold hands and grow together. And I know you've done a really good job of thinking about it, but the more that you can help us, guide us in how to continue the connection, continue the learnings, continue to share experiences. I think it would be the biggest help that you could give us.
Yeah, well, that's relatively easy because we aren't planning on going anywhere. So, we've recognized, just this year, your class, and we may edit all of this out, but your class is so special to me. You all were, you all started the NGE program a month after I took over at the partnership. And I felt I was still riding a wave of I was faking it till I was making it, right? But I found a tremendous amount of strength in your NGE class, the conversations that we had, the evident intellect and compassion that you represent. And it was sad to me that we weren't able to all convene in Atlanta. Right?
I know.
And what I hope coming out of all of this is that we will find more and better ways to really build these connections, right? Because nothing has been clearer to me during these last 8 months that it's these connections, these relationships that help sustain us in those difficult
Keep you going.
periods, right?
And I think, Pratt, the other thing that was really amazing with the partnership program was the education. It was the education of the issues, education of the history, education of, like you have Hispanic, you have brown, you have Black, the commonality of some of the challenges. It was so eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
And hearing from people in a safe space of what they have experienced, what they do experience, actually opened my eyes to some of the things that I blamed myself for. And then I thought, maybe that wasn't me.
That wasn't me, right?
And so I really hope that we could continue those dialogues. And I really think that the people coming after us and whatever way I can help the partnership programs and the other classes, there is tremendous value in it. And look where we are as a society.
Yeah. Well, just remember, just as you recognized in the NGE program, that piece doesn't change. You're not alone. You're never alone. We're here to support you every step of the way.
Thank you.
And